In the vast expanse of the Pacific Ocean, Iwo Jima stood as a volcanic fortress, rising ominously against the azure backdrop of the sea. For the Allied forces in early 1945, this small island held immense strategic value. Situated halfway between the Mariana Islands and the Japanese mainland, Iwo Jima was a critical waypoint. The airfields on the island allowed Japanese fighters and bombers to intercept American B-29 superfortresses on their raids against Japan. Capturing it would provide the Allies with a forward base for escort fighters, emergency landings, and logistical support. It was the key that could unlock the door to the Japanese mainland and bring the war to its climactic conclusion. For the Japanese, Iwo Jima was more than a defensive position. It was a symbol of defiance. General Tadamaki Kuribayashi, the commander of the island's defense, had transformed the terrain into a death trap. With over 11 miles of tunnel, fortified bunkers, and camouflage artillery positions, Kuribayashi's forces were prepared to bleed the Americans white. But as the American fleet prepared to invade, a new and terrifying threat loomed over the horizon: kamikaze attacks. The kamikaze pilots, or divine wind, embodied Japan's desperate resolve to fight to the end. These suicide aviators were a manifestation of the Bushido Code, sacrificing their lives in hopes of delivering devastating blows to the superior Allied forces. While the concept of self-sacrifice in battle was not new, the organized and systematic deployment of kamikaze squadrons marked a chilling evolution in warfare. Their single mission was clear: to crash their planes into American ships and inflict maximum damage, even at the cost of their own lives. The American fleet, a floating armada of steel and firepower, was a testament to the industrial might of the Allies. Task Force 58, under the command of Admiral Raymond Spruance, included powerful carriers such as the USS Essex, USS Enterprise, and USS Bunker Hill. These flat tops served as the mobile air bases from which Hellcats and Corsairs launched to dominate the skies. Supporting them were destroyers, cruisers, and battleships, each bristling with anti-aircraft weaponry, forming a protective barrier around the fleet's precious carriers. Despite the strength of the fleet, the Allied commanders were acutely aware of the kamikaze menace. Admiral Chester W. Nimitz, the stoic and calculating commander-in-chief of the Pacific Fleet, had seen the devastation caused by kamikaze attacks during the Leyte Gulf campaign. He understood that even a single plane could cripple a vital warship, and the kamikaze's psychological impact on crews was equally profound. The tension was palpable as sailors and officers prepared for an enemy that defied the conventions of war. The Allied strategy relied heavily on a multi-layered defense. Combat Air Patrols, CAP, would intercept kamikazes at a distance, while radar-directed anti-aircraft fire provided a deadly last line of defense. To counter the new threat, Nimitz had ordered the development of anti-aircraft screens, a formation of destroyers and cruisers positioned to absorb or repel kamikaze attacks before they could reach the carriers. Despite these precautions, the sheer unpredictability of the kamikaze tactic left an undercurrent of fear coursing through the fleet. As the invasion of Iwo Jima approached, every sailor and marine knew the stakes. For the Americans, it was a fight to secure a foothold on Japan's doorstep. For the Japanese, it was a last stand, with kamikaze pilots leading the charge in a deadly, sacrificial gambit. The stage was set for one of the most harrowing and pivotal battles of the Pacific War. The kamikaze threat did not emerge overnight. By the fall of 1944, Japan's military situation was desperate. The Imperial Navy had suffered catastrophic losses at the Battle of Leyte Gulf, and American forces were advancing steadily across the Pacific. With their industrial capacity dwindling and their air force depleted of experienced pilots, Japan needed a tactic that could maximize damage while requiring minimal resources. Thus, the kamikaze squadrons were born. The kamikaze strategy evolved from sporadic, isolated suicide missions into a coordinated and systematic effort. Japanese military leaders saw it as a way to turn their weakness into strength. These pilots, often in Mitsubishi Zero fighters or other lightly armed aircraft, would carry explosives and fuel to amplify the destructive power of their final dive. Their goal was to crash into American ships, particularly aircraft carriers, to disrupt the Allies' ability to launch and sustain invasions. The attacks were devastating not only in their physical impact, but also in the psychological toll they inflicted on the crews who faced them. Training for kamikaze pilots was brief but intense. Recruits were often young, many barely out of their teens, and were indoctrinated with a sense of honor and duty. They were told that their sacrifice would save Japan from invasion and preserve the emperor's legacy. The pilots practiced precision diving and targeting, often using crude simulators to prepare for their final missions. The emphasis was not on survival, but on ensuring maximum damage in their last moments. The first large-scale kamikaze attacks occurred during the Battle of Leyte Gulf in late 1944, where they succeeded in sinking several Allied ships and damaging others. The shock of these attacks reverberated through the Allied command. Sailors and officers struggled to comprehend the sheer resolve of an enemy willing to embrace death so readily. For many American servicemen, the kamikaze pilots were not just opponents. They were a force of nature, terrifying in their unpredictability and unrelenting in their determination. The ideological underpinning of the kamikaze program was deeply rooted in Japan's militaristic culture. The Bushido Code, which emphasized honor, loyalty, and sacrifice, was central to the mindset of the Japanese military. Propaganda portrayed the kamikaze pilots as heroes, their missions as acts of divine intervention. Families of pilots were told to be proud of their son's ultimate sacrifice, and the pilots themselves were revered as embodiments of national spirit. The government even organized farewell ceremonies where pilots wrote letters to their families and were toasted with sake before their final flights. For the Allies, countering the kamikaze threat required ingenuity and adaptability. Admiral Nimitz and his staff understood that traditional naval tactics would be insufficient. They began to develop new defensive strategies, such as deploying picket ships to form a perimeter around the main fleet. These anti-aircraft screens included destroyers and smaller craft equipped with radar and anti-aircraft guns, designed to intercept kamikaze planes before they could reach the carriers and troop transports. The system was not foolproof, but it provided a critical buffer. Radar became a cornerstone of the Allies' efforts to mitigate the kamikaze threat. Advances in radar technology allowed ships to detect incoming planes at greater distances, giving anti-aircraft crews more time to prepare. However, even with this advantage, the speed and maneuverability of the kamikaze planes often meant that the defenders had mere seconds to react. Anti-aircraft gunners became the fleet's unsung heroes, their steady nerves and quick reflexes saving countless lives. Despite these measures, the psychological impact of the kamikaze attacks was profound. For sailors, the sight of a plane hurtling toward their ship at full speed was a harrowing experience. The knowledge that the enemy pilot was intent on dying to achieve his goal added an unnerving element to the combat. Crews worked tirelessly to repair damage and recover bodies after each attack, knowing that another wave could come at any moment. By early 1945, the kamikaze had become a central element of Japan's defense strategy. As the Allies prepared for the invasion of Iwo Jima, they knew they would face not only entrenched defenders on the island, but also relentless aerial assaults from kamikaze pilots. The stage was set for one of the most intense and emotionally charged chapters of the Pacific War, where bravery and desperation would collide in the skies above the Pacific. On the morning of February 19, 1945, the largest amphibious assault force ever assembled in the Pacific approached the black sand beaches of Iwo Jima. Under a cloudless sky, the rumble of naval bombardments shook the volcanic island as the American fleet unleashed its fury on the Japanese defenses. For days leading up to the invasion, battleships and cruisers had pounded the island with heavy artillery, while carrier-based aircraft strafed and bombed in an attempt to weaken the Japanese positions. Yet, as the first landing craft reached the shores, it became clear that the defenders, hidden in their labyrinth of tunnels and bunkers, had survived the onslaught virtually unscathed. The first waves of Marines encountered no immediate resistance. The eerie silence as they disembarked onto the beaches was unsettling. Unbeknownst to them, General Kuribayashi had ordered his troops to hold fire until the beaches were fully crowded with men and equipment. When the Japanese guns finally opened up, the results were devastating. Machine gun fire raked the sand, mortar shells exploded in deadly bursts, and artillery from hidden emplacements sent shrapnel tearing through the ranks of the advancing Marines. The volcanic ash of the beaches offered no solid footing, and the soldiers struggled to move under the weight of their gear. Casualties mounted as the landing force fought desperately to establish a foothold. The terrain of Iwo Jima proved to be as formidable an enemy as the Japanese themselves. The beaches were narrow, and the soft volcanic sand made it nearly impossible for tanks and heavy equipment to move inland. Mount Suribachi, the island's southernmost point, loomed above the battlefield like a grim sentinel. Its slopes were riddled with fortified positions, allowing the Japanese to rain fire down on the invaders. Meanwhile, the central and northern parts of the island were dominated by a network of caves, trenches, and concealed artillery that turned every yard of progress into a bloody struggle. The American fleet played a crucial role in supporting the troops on the ground. Naval gunfire from destroyers and cruisers provided covering fire, targeting suspected enemy positions as Marines advanced. Carrier-based aircraft flew continuous sorties, dropping bombs and napalm to dislodge entrenched defenders. Pilots demonstrated extraordinary bravery, often diving through intense anti-aircraft fire to ensure their bombs hit their targets. Meanwhile, amphibious landing craft shuttled reinforcements and supplies to the beaches, braving both enemy fire and the treacherous surf. As the battle raged on land, the kamikaze threat intensified at sea. Japanese aircraft began targeting the fleet, launching waves of suicide attacks against the Allied ships supporting the invasion. The first of these strikes came on the afternoon of February 19th, catching the Americans off guard. Radar operators detected incoming planes, and anti-aircraft guns sprang into action. The sky over the fleet was soon filled with tracer fire and black plumes of smoke from exploding shells. One of the first kamikaze planes to break through the defenses headed straight for an American destroyer. Despite being riddled with bullets, the plane managed to crash into the ship's deck, causing a massive explosion. The impact killed several sailors and left the vessel badly damaged. Nearby, a carrier narrowly avoided disaster when a Hellcat from the Combat Air Patrol shot down another kamikaze moments before it could strike. The scenes were chaotic. Crews rushing to put out fires, wounded sailors being evacuated, and gun crews maintaining a relentless barrage against incoming planes. The heroism displayed by the fleet's sailors and aviators during these attacks was nothing short of extraordinary. Anti-aircraft gunners worked tirelessly under the constant threat of being targeted themselves. Many were young and inexperienced, yet they stood their ground, firing at the incoming planes with unwavering determination. Pilots from the Combat Air Patrol repeatedly risked their lives to intercept kamikazes before they could reach the ships. These aerial dogfights were brutal and often ended in flames as planes from both sides spiraled into the sea. For the Marines on the beaches, the kamikaze attacks added a new layer of danger. The sound of explosions at sea reminded them that their lifeline to reinforcements and supplies was under constant threat. Despite this, the Marines pressed on, their progress measured in yards rather than miles. Every bunker cleared and every trench captured came at a high cost. Flamethrower teams and demolition squads became essential, as they were often the only way to deal with the Japanese defenders hidden in fortified positions. As night fell on the first day of the invasion, the battlefield was a scene of carnage. The beaches were littered with the wreckage of landing craft and the bodies of the fallen. Fires burned across the island, casting an eerie glow over the dark waters surrounding Iwo Jima. The Marines dug in for the night, knowing that the battle had only just begun. Offshore, the fleet braced itself for another round of kamikaze attacks, their crews determined to protect the men on the island at all costs. Despite the hardships, there was no question of retreat. The invasion of Iwo Jima was a critical step in the Allied campaign to bring the war to Japan's doorstep. The courage and resilience of the men involved, both on land and at sea, would define the character of the battle in the days to come. For the Americans, the struggle for Iwo Jima was a fight for survival against an enemy that had no intention of surrendering. The skies over Iwo Jima became a deadly theater of war as American and Japanese pilots clashed in fierce combat. For the Allies, maintaining air superiority was essential to protect the invasion fleet and provide critical support to the Marines on the ground. Yet, the kamikaze attacks brought a level of chaos and desperation that stretched the limits of their capabilities. The Japanese air forces, though depleted, launched wave after wave of suicide missions, testing the resilience and tactics of the Allied forces. The kamikaze pilots often emerged from low cloud cover or the shadows of island peaks, catching Allied radar and combat air patrol (CAP) units off guard. The CAP consisted of agile F-6F Hellcats and F-4U Corsairs, which circled the fleet in rotating shifts to intercept incoming threats. These fighter pilots were some of the best-trained aviators in the Pacific theater, and their role in countering the kamikaze menace was pivotal. Their job was to engage enemy planes before they could dive toward the ships, a task that required both precision and nerves of steel. Despite the best efforts of the CAP, kamikaze planes frequently slipped through their defenses. When this happened, the fleet's anti-aircraft guns roared to life. The destroyers and cruisers stationed around the carriers formed a protective screen, their decks bristling with Bofors 40mm and Oerlikon 20mm cannons. These guns unleashed a torrent of fire, filling the air with tracers and black puffs of flak. The effectiveness of this last line of defense varied. While many kamikazes were shot down, others managed to penetrate the shield with devastating consequences. The battles were not without cost to the Americans. In one engagement, a kamikaze plane targeted the USS Saratoga, a fleet carrier serving as a vital airbase for Hellcat fighters. The plane evaded anti-aircraft fire and struck the ship's deck, setting off explosions and fires that killed dozens of sailors and grounded several aircraft. Despite the damage, the Saratoga's crew worked tirelessly to extinguish the flames and restore the ship's operational capability. Such incidents highlighted the vulnerability of even the most formidable vessels when faced with the kamikaze's determination. Radar operators played a crucial role in these encounters. Using advanced detection systems, they tracked incoming planes and relayed their positions to both the CAP and the shipboard gunners. However, the sheer number of kamikazes and the limitations of radar technology sometimes led to delays or missed detections. The Japanese often exploited these weaknesses by coordinating their attacks with conventional bombing raids, creating confusion and overwhelming the Allied defenses. The losses were not one-sided. The Japanese air forces paid a heavy price for their kamikaze strategy. Every attack cost them an aircraft and a pilot, resources that were becoming increasingly scarce. Moreover, the American fighters and anti-aircraft gunners were improving their tactics with each engagement. Hellcat pilots, for example, developed a technique known as the thatch weave, a defensive maneuver that allowed two fighters to cover each other against faster or more maneuverable enemies like the Mitsubishi Zero. This adaptation significantly reduced American casualties in air-to-air combat. For the Japanese, the kamikaze missions were both a tactical weapon and a psychological statement. The sight of a plane diving directly toward a ship, its pilot intent on sacrificing himself, was deeply unsettling for Allied sailors. Yet, this terror was matched by the bravery of the American crews who stood their ground, manning their guns even as the enemy bore down on them. The gunners became adept at targeting the kamikaze's engines and fuel tanks, maximizing their chances of disabling the planes before impact. As the battle continued, the toll on both sides mounted. The Japanese suffered devastating losses in aircraft and pilots, while the Allies endured damage to several ships and the loss of hundreds of lives. The strain on the American forces was palpable, but their resolve remained unbroken. The fleet's ability to adapt and persevere under such relentless attacks became a defining feature of the campaign. The struggle for air dominance over Iwo Jima was more than a series of dogfights and kamikaze raids. It was a test of endurance and ingenuity. For the Allies, each victory in the sky brought them closer to securing the island and turning it into a forward base for the final assault on Japan. For the Japanese, the kamikaze missions represented a desperate attempt to delay the inevitable and inflict as much pain as possible on their enemies. By the end of February, the air battles had reached a fever pitch. The skies above Iwo Jima were a chaotic blend of contrails, explosions, and falling debris. The outcome of these engagements would have far-reaching implications, not only for the battle itself, but for the entire Pacific campaign. As the Allies pressed their advantage, the Japanese defenders on the island faced an increasingly dire situation, setting the stage for the climactic phases of the conflict. Admiral Chester W. Nimitz sat at his desk aboard the USS El Dorado, poring over the latest reports from the Iwo Jima front. His face, calm and deliberate, betrayed no sign of the immense pressure bearing down on him. To the sailors, Marines, and aviators under his command, Nimitz was more than a leader. He was a symbol of Allied perseverance in the war against Japan. His strategic brilliance and unwavering composure had become legendary among the ranks. Nimitz understood that success at Iwo Jima extended far beyond the simple capture of territory. It was a crucible that tested coordination, resilience, and the ability to adapt under relentless pressure. Balancing calculated risks with the heavy human cost of war, Nimitz's leadership inspired confidence throughout the fleet, even during the darkest hours. Among the ranks of the Allied aviators were young pilots, the first line of defense against the kamikaze menace. These men, flying the formidable F-6F Hellcats, faced not only a skilled and desperate enemy, but also the crushing weight of responsibility. One such pilot was Lieutenant James Jimmy Harmon, a 23-year-old from Kansas who had grown up dreaming of the skies. Harmon's squadron, stationed aboard the USS Essex, was renowned for its daring and effectiveness in combating the agile Japanese Zeros. Known for his calm demeanor and sharp instincts, Harmon had earned a reputation as one of the squadron's most dependable aviators. Each day brought new challenges for Harmon and his fellow pilots. The kamikaze threat demanded constant vigilance. Often, they scrambled to launch with mere seconds of warning, guided by radar reports that marked the location of incoming enemy planes. Harmon's understanding of his mission was unflinchingly clear. If he and his comrades failed, the men on the ships below would pay the ultimate price. Every dogfight, every intercept, it felt like the weight of the fleet was on your wings, Harmon later recounted. The Hellcat was a machine built for resilience, its robust armor shielding pilots from enemy fire, while its 6.50 caliber machine guns provided formidable firepower. Yet even the best aircraft was only as effective as the skill of its pilot. Harmon's most harrowing mission occurred during a kamikaze wave targeting the USS Bunker Hill. As his squadron rose to intercept, one Japanese Zero broke free of the dogfight and dove straight toward the carrier. Pushing his Hellcat to its limits, Harmon closed the distance in mere moments, firing a precise burst that tore through the Zero's engine. The kamikaze exploded just yards from the ship, sending a shockwave that rocked both the carrier and Harmon's plane. Though his Hellcat was pelted with debris, Harmon managed to return to the Essex, his damaged aircraft landing amidst cheers from the deck crew. That day, his bravery saved dozens of lives, a feat that embodied the relentless courage of the combat air patrol. On the other side of the conflict, Japanese kamikaze pilots were revered as national heroes. One such pilot, Lieutenant Hiroshi Miyazaki, a 21-year-old from Osaka, embodied the unwavering devotion to the emperor that defined Japan's war effort. Miyazaki, a quiet and thoughtful young man, had once dreamed of becoming a teacher. His path to the cockpit of a kamikaze plane was marked by both patriotism and resignation. Before embarking on his mission, he wrote a farewell letter to his family, his words a poignant blend of pride and sorrow. "Though I will not return, Know that I give my life for Japan and for your safety. His final flight ended in tragedy when his plane was intercepted and destroyed by American gunners. Yet, like so many kamikaze pilots, Miyazaki's story revealed the depth of the ideological and emotional forces driving Japan's desperate struggle. Aboard the Allied ships, sailors were locked in their own battle for survival. Chief Gunner's Mate Henry Hank Mitchell, a seasoned naval veteran stationed on the USS San Diego, was a pillar of calm amidst the chaos. Mitchell and his crew manned a 40mm Bofors cannon, a linchpin in the fleet's anti-aircraft defenses. Under constant threat, Mitchell's team scanned the skies for the telltale glint of incoming planes. During one particularly intense engagement, Mitchell coordinated his gunners with unyielding precision, bringing down 3 kamikaze planes in rapid succession. The third aircraft exploded so close that shrapnel rained down onto the deck, injuring several sailors. Unshaken, Mitchell rallied his men, ensuring that the gun remained operational. His actions that day not only saved his ship, but earned him the enduring respect of his crewmates. The psychological toll of the kamikaze threat weighed heavily on the men at sea. The explosions, fires, and the constant specter of death left scars that went beyond the physical. Sailors often spoke of the terrifying moments when a plane would break through the defensive screen, the knowledge that a single kamikaze could unleash devastation filling their minds. Despite this, moments of levity persisted. Letters from home, shared jokes, and stories of narrow escapes served as lifelines to normalcy amidst the relentless tension. It was this camaraderie that sustained them, creating bonds forged in the crucible of war. The kamikaze attacks tested not only the sailors and pilots, but also the Allied chain of command. Admiral Raymond Spruance, overseeing the invasion from the USS Indianapolis, worked closely with Nimitz to adapt tactics to the evolving threat. Known for his calm and methodical demeanor, Spruance earned the nickname Electric Brain for his ability to process complex scenarios with remarkable clarity. Together, he and Nimitz formed a leadership dynamic that balanced calculated strategy with unwavering resolve. Their ability to instill confidence and adapt to an unpredictable enemy was a cornerstone of the campaign's success. As the battle progressed, the determination of the Allied forces never wavered. Figures like Harmon, Mitchell, Nimitz, and Spruance represented a collective effort that transcended individual heroics. Their stories, intertwined with those of the Japanese defenders, painted a complex portrait of courage, sacrifice, and the grim realities of war. The dawn of February 21st, 1945, brought no respite to the Allied fleet surrounding Iwo Jima. For days, the ships had weathered relentless waves of kamikaze attacks, while continuing to provide vital support to the Marines struggling on the island. Yet, the events of this day would push the defenders to their limits and etch unforgettable scenes of heroism and tragedy into the annals of the Pacific War. Shortly after 1,000 hours, radar operators on several ships detected a large formation of incoming aircraft. Initial reports suggested a mix of conventional bombers and kamikaze planes heading toward the fleet. The combat air patrol scrambled to intercept, their Hellcats and Corsairs roaring off the flight decks of the carriers. As the American fighters raced toward the attackers, the ships braced for impact, their crews manning anti-aircraft stations in tense anticipation. The first wave of Japanese planes arrived with deadly precision, targeting the aircraft carriers and destroyers that formed the backbone of the Allied armada. Kamikaze planes dove out of the clouds, their engines screaming as they zeroed in on their targets. The USS Bismarck C, a Casablanca-class escort carrier, was among the first ships to face the onslaught. Despite intense anti-aircraft fire, one kamikaze broke through and slammed into the ship's flight deck, detonating a massive explosion that ignited fuel and ammunition. Within minutes, flames engulfed the carrier, and its crew fought desperately to save their ship. As the Bismarck C burned, other ships faced their own battles for survival. The USS Saratoga, a veteran fleet carrier, came under attack by multiple kamikazes. Anti-aircraft gunners managed to shoot down several planes, but one managed to crash into the aft section of the flight deck. The resulting explosion killed dozens of crew members and disabled the ship's flight operations. Damage control teams sprang into action, working tirelessly to extinguish fires and prevent further explosions. Their efforts saved the Saratoga from destruction, but the carrier was forced to withdraw from the battle. Amid the chaos, the heroism of individual sailors and aviators stood out. On the USS Laffey, a Sumner-class destroyer nicknamed the ship that would not die, the crew faced one of the fiercest kamikaze assaults of the day. The Laffey's gunners shot down several incoming planes, but the relentless attacks left the ship battered and its decks strewn with wreckage. Chief Boatswain's Mate Harold Swede Carlson, a seasoned sailor, coordinated fire from multiple gun stations, directing his men with unwavering resolve. When a kamikaze struck the forward section of the ship, Carlson led the efforts to contain the damage, saving countless lives and keeping the Laffey afloat. The losses extended beyond the material damage. For the sailors who witnessed the attacks, the psychological toll was immense. The sight of planes diving toward their ships, their pilots fully committed to death, left an indelible mark. Survivors of the Bismarck seas sinking described the horror of leaping into the oil-slicked waters as explosions rocked the vessel. Rescue efforts by nearby destroyers were fraught with danger as fires and secondary explosions threatened both the rescuers and the survivors. Amid the carnage, moments of extraordinary courage emerged. On one destroyer, a young sailor named James Harlow manned his anti-aircraft gun despite being wounded by shrapnel. With blood streaming down his face, he continued to fire at incoming kamikazes, determined to protect his shipmates. Harlow's actions exemplified the spirit of resilience that defined the Allied response to the kamikaze threat. By the end of the day, the scale of the attack became clear. Over 30 Japanese planes had launched suicide missions, and while many were shot down, the damage inflicted was severe. The Bismarck Sea became the last U.S. carrier to be sunk in World War II, with significant loss of life. The Saratoga, though heavily damaged, survived thanks to the skill and bravery of its crew. Other ships bore the scars of the battle, their decks scorched and their hulls pockmarked by shrapnel. The emotional toll on the sailors was palpable. For many, the sight of their comrades' sacrifice and the destruction of their ships was a sobering reminder of the cost of war. Yet, the determination to persevere remained unbroken. Survivors spoke of a shared sense of duty, a bond forged in the crucible of battle that drove them to fight on. As night fell, the fleet regrouped, tending to the wounded and assessing the damage. For the Japanese, the kamikaze attacks had achieved mixed results. While they had inflicted significant damage and losses, the Allied fleet remained operational, continuing to provide critical support to the invasion of Iwo Jima. The relentless resolve of the American forces, both at sea and on the island, foreshadowed the eventual outcome of the battle. The events of February 21st marked a turning point in the kamikaze campaign. For the Allies, it underscored the importance of vigilance and adaptability in the face of an enemy willing to embrace death as a weapon. For the Japanese, it highlighted the limits of the kamikaze strategy as the human and material costs of such attacks became increasingly unsustainable. The battle was far from over, but the courage displayed on both sides left a lasting legacy that would shape the course of the Pacific War. As the kamikaze attacks intensified, the Allied forces leaned heavily on technological advancements to counter the deadly threat. By 1945, the Pacific Fleet's defensive capabilities had evolved into a sophisticated network of weapons, coordination, and innovation. These advancements often marked the difference between survival and disaster during kamikaze raids, as every second and every decision mattered in the chaotic battles at sea. At the core of the fleet's anti-aircraft defenses were automatic cannons, like the Oerlikon 20mm and the Bofors 40mm guns. These versatile weapons, installed on almost every major vessel, from mighty battleships to agile destroyers, became indispensable tools against the onslaught of kamikaze planes. The Oerlikon's high rate of fire and ability to track fast-moving targets made it ideal for engaging low-flying aircraft. Meanwhile, the larger Bofors, capable of firing explosive shells, created devastating bursts of shrapnel that could tear through even the most determined attackers. Together, these guns formed the backbone of the flak screens that encircled the fleet, providing a critical last line of defense. One of the greatest challenges the fleet faced was the coordination required to repel kamikaze attacks. These assaults often came in waves, with dozens of planes converging from multiple directions. In the face of such chaos, the Allies relied on centralized fire control systems to maintain order. Radar-guided directors tracked incoming targets and relayed precise data to gunners, allowing them to adjust their aim dynamically. This innovation turned the fleet into a cohesive defensive unit, rather than a collection of isolated ships. The introduction of proximity fuses in anti-aircraft shells added another layer of lethality. These fuses detonated the shells when they approached the target, negating the need for direct hits and significantly enhancing the effectiveness of anti-aircraft fire. Above the decks, the F-4U Corsair emerged as one of the most critical assets against kamikaze planes. Dubbed the Whistling Death by the Japanese, the Corsair was a fearsome fighter bomber known for its speed, rugged construction, and formidable firepower. Its pilots, stationed on the fleet's carriers, became the first responders to radar alerts of incoming waves. Within minutes of an alarm, Corsairs roared into the sky to intercept kamikaze planes before they could reach the fleet. The Corsair's 6.50 caliber machine guns and durable airframe gave it a significant edge in dogfights, allowing pilots to engage the nimble and often desperate attackers head-on. Their efforts were not just about skill but sheer will, as each mission carried the weight of protecting thousands of lives below. Behind these technological marvels were the often unsung engineers and radio operators who ensured the fleet's radar systems functioned optimally. Cramped in control rooms filled with the hum of machinery and the tension of battle, radar operators scanned their screens for the faint blips that signaled incoming planes. This early warning system, while critical, had limitations. The low-flying kamikaze planes frequently exploited terrain features and weather conditions to evade detection, using gaps in radar coverage to approach undetected. For the operators, these gaps were a constant source of frustration and urgency, as they worked tirelessly to refine their tracking methods. Even with these advancements, the defensive systems were far from infallible. The sheer intensity of the kamikaze attacks sometimes overwhelmed even the most coordinated defenses. Gunners on the decks described the frantic moments when multiple planes broke through the flak screens, forcing them to pivot rapidly between targets. In such scenarios, the effectiveness of the fleet's defenses often came down to the courage and discipline of individual sailors. Men like gunner's mate William "Billy" Crane, who served on the USS New Mexico, exemplified this bravery. During one harrowing attack, Crane's quick thinking and relentless firing brought down 2 kamikazes that had evaded the larger guns. His actions saved his ship from certain disaster and earned him the gratitude of his crewmates. The technological innovation extended beyond the immediate battle. Ships were equipped with advanced firefighting systems, including seawater pumps and foam dispensers, to combat the fires caused by kamikaze strikes. Damage control teams underwent grueling training to prepare for emergencies, learning to seal bulkheads, patch holes, and extinguish flames under the most challenging conditions. These measures proved life-saving in numerous instances, allowing ships to remain operational even after sustaining severe damage. While the Allies adapted quickly, the Japanese faced mounting challenges in sustaining their kamikaze campaign. Aircraft losses were staggering, and the industrial infrastructure needed to produce replacements was being decimated by Allied bombing campaigns. The quality of kamikaze planes and pilots also began to decline. Early in the campaign, kamikaze pilots were volunteers, often seasoned aviators who fully understood the weight of their mission. By 1945, many of the pilots were hastily trained cadets, some barely out of their teens, flying outdated or poorly maintained planes. Despite their dedication, these factors reduce the overall effectiveness of their missions. The kamikaze strategy also exposed weaknesses in Japanese military coordination. The lack of integration between the air and naval forces often left kamikaze attacks unsupported, diminishing their impact. Allied intelligence, bolstered by code-breaking efforts, further undermined Japanese plans by intercepting communications and predicting attack patterns. This allowed the Allies to deploy countermeasures preemptively, blunting the effectiveness of the kamikaze waves. To further mitigate the threat, the Allies deployed decoy ships or picket ships, strategically placed to draw kamikaze attacks away from the main fleet. These smaller vessels, heavily armed and crewed by experienced sailors, acted as sacrificial guardians, bearing the brunt of the attacks to protect carriers and transports. Though these missions were perilous, the courage of the picket crews played a pivotal role in safeguarding the fleet. As February 1945 drew to a close, the cumulative effect of these innovations and adaptations began to shift the balance of power. While kamikaze planes continued to cause devastation, the increasing efficiency of the Allied defenses limited their overall impact. Each successful interception and each new tactic brought the Allies closer to securing the waters around Iwo Jima and achieving their ultimate objective. For the sailors and aviators on the front lines, the kamikaze threat was more than a tactical challenge. It was a test of endurance and ingenuity. The lessons learned during the Iwo Jima campaign would resonate long after the war, influencing naval warfare for decades to come. It was a battle fought not just with guns and planes, but with the relentless determination to adapt and prevail. The assault on Iwo Jima had reached a fever pitch. By late February 1945, American forces had carved out precarious footholds on the volcanic island, fighting tenacious Japanese resistance entrenched in a web of tunnels and bunkers. For the Marines on the ground, survival hinged on the unyielding support of the fleet, which provided everything from devastating artillery barges to the rapid evacuation of the wounded. At sea, the sailors and aviators of the Allied Armada worked relentlessly, their efforts forming the lifeline that kept the ground campaign moving forward through one of the bloodiest battles of the Pacific War. In the early hours of February 23rd, the fleet began its day with a synchronized bombardment of Japanese positions. Battleships like the USS Nevada and USS Tennessee unleashed their massive 14-inch guns in an unrelenting display of firepower. Each thunderous salvo targeted critical strongholds near Mount Suribachi and along the island's northern ridges. Destroyers moved closer to the shore, their smaller caliber guns delivering precision strikes against artillery emplacements concealed within the rugged terrain. These bombardments were guided by forward observers stationed with Marine units. These observers, often operating under intense enemy fire, relayed real-time coordinates to the ships, enabling surgical strikes against entrenched Japanese positions. Above the battlefield, the skies buzzed with activity as carrier-based aircraft from the USS Enterprise, USS Essex, and other flat tops roared into action. Dive bombers and fighter bombers flew continuous sorties, dropping payloads of bombs and napalm onto fortified positions. They strafed Japanese troop concentrations with relentless machine gun fire, disrupting reinforcements and supply lines. Despite enduring punishing anti-aircraft fire from hidden batteries, the aviators pressed on, their persistence a critical factor in softening Japanese defenses. Pilots like Lieutenant Robert "Bob" Chase exemplified this bravery, making repeated bombing runs despite sustaining damage to his aircraft from ground fire. Chase's actions, like those of many others, highlighted the selflessness of the airmen whose efforts paved the way for the Marines' advance. The fleet's role extended beyond offensive firepower. As the battle's casualty toll mounted, the task of evacuating the wounded became a logistical challenge of immense proportions. Landing craft, originally designed to ferry troops and equipment, were repurposed as floating ambulances. Medics and corpsmen worked tirelessly alongside naval crews to stabilize the injured before transporting them to hospital ships stationed offshore. These vessels, equipped with state-of-the-art medical facilities and staffed by skilled surgeons, became beacons of hope. To the Marines, the sight of white hospital ships on the horizon contrasted starkly with the chaos and bloodshed on the beaches. For many, these floating sanctuaries represented their only chance of survival. Amidst this intense support operation, the Kamikaze threat loomed large. Japanese planes, often appearing in coordinated waves, targeted the transport and supply ships that formed the backbone of the fleet's logistical operations. On February 24th, a particularly fierce wave of kamikaze attacks struck near the landing zone. Radar operators sounded the alarm as incoming planes closed in, triggering a furious response from the fleet's anti-aircraft gunners. The destroyer USS Laffey, already bearing scars from previous engagements, intercepted several planes in quick succession. Its gunners shot down two before a third crashed into its stern, causing a fire that threatened to spread to the ammunition stores. The ship's crew, led by the calm and resolute Lieutenant Commander Fred Beckton, extinguished the flames and restored functionality within hours, showcasing the resilience that defined the fleet. On land, the Marines pushed toward Mount Suribachi, a volcanic peak that dominated the southern end of the island. Naval gunfire played a pivotal role in supporting their advance. Sailors later recounted how the relentless bombardments shook the ground so violently that the concussions could be felt aboard the ships. For the Marines, these explosions created fleeting opportunities to move forward. When the American flag was raised atop Mount Suribachi on February 23rd, cheers erupted across the fleet, with sailors lining the decks of their ships to witness the momentous occasion. For those at sea, it was a rare instance of triumph amid the grim realities of war, a symbol of progress in a campaign marked by staggering losses. However, the victory at Suribachi was only a milestone, not the end. In the island's northern regions, the fighting intensified as Marines encountered increasingly desperate Japanese resistance. The enemy used a combination of concealed artillery, booby traps, and suicide charges to slow the American advance. The fleet adapted to these evolving challenges, providing precise fire support against cave systems and hidden artillery positions. Destroyers, with their smaller caliber guns and maneuverability, patrolled close to shore, delivering pinpoint strikes into narrow ravines and steep ridges. Meanwhile, carrier-based aircraft maintained constant air cover, ensuring that Marine units could call in airstrikes whenever needed. The coordination between sea, air, and land forces was a testament to the Allies' ingenuity and adaptability. Communication networks, built from a mix of radio relays and signal flags, allowed for seamless coordination of fire missions. Yet, this synchronization was not without its challenges. Instances of friendly fire underscored the complexity of managing such operations, with forward observers working tirelessly to adjust coordinates and minimize the risks to their own troops. For the sailors supporting the ground campaign, the battle was an unrelenting test of endurance. On board the fleet's ships, the routine alternated between moments of frenetic action and tense anticipation. Between bombardments and air sorties, crews repaired damage, replenished ammunition, and maintained equipment with an urgency born of necessity. Aircraft carrier deck crews faced their own perils. Accidents during takeoffs and landings were common, adding another layer of danger to their critical work. Stories of heroism abounded, such as that of Chief Petty Officer Henry Morales, who risked his life to rescue a trapped pilot from a burning Hellcat moments before its fuel tank exploded. The Japanese defenders, for their part, showed no signs of surrender. Long-range artillery intermittently targeted the fleet, and gunners continued firing even as their positions were obliterated. The kamikaze pilots, though facing declining resources and training, remained a persistent threat. Their unwavering determination highlighted the depth of Japan's desperation and the psychological toll this unique form of warfare inflicted on the Allied forces. As February turned to March, the focus of the Allied fleet began to shift. With the capture of key airfields on Iwo Jima, the Navy transitioned toward logistical support, facilitating the influx of reinforcements and supplies while preparing for the next phase of the Pacific campaign. Yet, The lessons learned during the battle would resonate long after the island was secured. The seamless integration of naval, air, and ground forces at Iwo Jima set a precedent for future amphibious operations, demonstrating the critical importance of unified command in overcoming entrenched resistance. For the sailors who served in the fleet, the battle for Iwo Jima became a defining chapter of their lives. It was a testament to their resilience, resourcefulness, and unwavering commitment to the mission. Each shell fired, each plane launched, and each wounded Marine evacuated represented a step toward victory, a victory won through the collective efforts of men who refused to falter in the face of unimaginable adversity. The brutal campaign for Iwo Jima, which had begun with the deafening roar of naval bombardments and waves of Marines storming the shore, drew to a close in March 1945. The Allies had achieved victory, but it was a triumph steeped in immense sacrifice and haunting memories. As the guns fell silent and the last remnants of Japanese resistance were extinguished, the battered island stood as a testament to the unyielding resolve of both the attackers and defenders. For the sailors, Marines, and airmen involved, the conclusion of this pivotal battle marked a moment of reflection, mourning, and preparation for the next challenge in the Pacific War. The human cost of the Battle of Iwo Jima was staggering. Over 6,800 American servicemen lost their lives, and nearly 20,000 were wounded. These figures represented one of the highest casualty rates of any single operation in the Pacific Theater. Each name added to this grim tally told a story of sacrifice. Young Marines cut down on the black sands, sailors lost to kamikaze strikes, and pilots who never returned from the skies above the island. For the Japanese, the losses were even more catastrophic. Of the roughly 21,000 defenders, nearly all were killed in action or by suicide, many choosing death over capture and adherence to their code of honor. Only a few hundred were taken alive, their survival regarded as dishonorable by their comrades. The scale of the destruction was a sobering reminder of the ferocity of warfare and the unrelenting tenacity of those who fought on both sides. Among the most enduring images of the battle was the raising of the American flag atop Mount Suribachi on February 23, 1945. Captured in a now iconic photograph by Joe Rosenthal, this moment symbolized not just the progress of the campaign, but also the resilience and spirit of the Allied forces. For sailors watching from the decks of their ships, it was a rare and uplifting sight amidst weeks of unrelenting tension. On the island, Marines paused briefly to cheer, their celebration tempered by the knowledge that the battle was far from over. For many, the flag represented not just a military achievement, but a beacon of hope in the darkest of times. In the final weeks of the campaign, the challenges faced by the Allied forces shifted. As the Japanese defenders retreated into their vast network of tunnels and bunkers, the Marines were forced into grueling close-quarters combat. These subterranean passages, painstakingly carved into the volcanic rock, served as both defensive strongholds and deadly traps. For those tasked with clearing them, each step was fraught with danger. Explosives, flamethrowers, and bayonets became the tools of survival as Marines navigated pitch-black corridors, often under the threat of ambushes or concealed explosives. Above ground, the fleet's gunners worked tirelessly to suppress Japanese positions, targeting suspected entrances and ventilation shafts with devastating precision. The kamikaze threat persisted until the very end of the battle, adding another layer of peril for the fleet. Although the frequency of attacks diminished, their impact remained profound. On March 9th, a lone kamikaze struck the USS Franklin, a fleet carrier stationed near Iwo Jima. The resulting explosion killed over 800 sailors and wounded hundreds more, a stark reminder that even as victory seemed within reach, the cost remained high. The crew's heroic efforts to save the Franklin, extinguishing fires, shoring up bulkheads, and stabilizing the ship, underscored the extraordinary courage and determination that defined the battle. As the fighting subsided, the strategic importance of Iwo Jima became increasingly evident. The airfields on the island, captured at great cost, provided a vital staging ground for Allied bombers targeting Japan's home islands. In the months following the battle, hundreds of damaged B-29 superfortresses made emergency landings on Iwo Jima, saving the lives of countless airmen. The island's proximity to Japan also allowed for increased air cover during bombing missions, enhancing the effectiveness of the Allied air campaign and accelerating the drive toward ultimate victory. The lessons learned at Iwo Jima shaped subsequent operations, most notably the Battle for Okinawa, which began in April 1945. The Allies refined their tactics, achieving even greater integration between naval, air, and ground forces. The experience of defending against kamikaze attacks spurred advancements in radar technology and anti-aircraft defenses, innovations that would prove invaluable in the final stages of the Pacific War and beyond. These hard-earned lessons also highlighted the importance of adaptability, coordination, and the willingness to confront unprecedented challenges. For the Japanese, the loss of Iwo Jima was a devastating blow to their defensive strategy. The island had been a critical component of their perimeter defense, and its fall brought Allied forces perilously close to the Japanese mainland. The ferocity with which the Japanese fought on Iwo Jima, coupled with their increasing reliance on kamikaze tactics, foreshadowed the desperate measures they would employ during the war's final chapters. For many Japanese soldiers and civilians, the battle became a symbol of both defiance and the devastating toll of a war they could no longer win. The emotional toll of Iwo Jima weighed heavily on the men who fought there. For the Marines who had stormed the beaches, the memories of fallen comrades were etched into their minds, a reminder of the price of victory and the bonds forged in the crucible of combat. Many sailors and airmen who had supported the campaign viewed the island from a distance, its smoldering landscape a somber monument to their shared sacrifice. For all who survived, the end of the battle was not just a military milestone, but a deeply personal reckoning with the horrors of war. The victory at Iwo Jima demonstrated the effectiveness of combined arms operations and the resilience of Allied forces in the face of overwhelming adversity. It was not just a testament to their military capabilities, but also a reflection of the unity and determination that had defined the Pacific Campaign. As the Allied fleet prepared for the invasion of Okinawa, the lessons of Iwo Jima would serve as a guide, shaping the strategies and tactics that would ultimately bring the war to a close. Looking beyond the battlefield, the capture of Iwo Jima underscored the importance of cooperation among the Allied nations. American forces had led the charge, but their efforts were bolstered by contributions from across the coalition, including intelligence, logistical support, and material aid. This spirit of collaboration would remain a cornerstone of the Allied war effort, laying the foundation for the partnerships that would shape the post-war world. As the Allies celebrated their hard-won victory, they were acutely aware of the challenges that lay ahead. The specter of a potential invasion of Japan loomed large, a prospect that promised to dwarf even the horrors of Iwo Jima. Yet, the battle had also reinforced the Allies' belief in their ability to overcome even the most formidable obstacles. The sacrifices made on Iwo Jima were not in vain. They were a vital step toward peace and the defeat of tyranny. In the days following the battle, Allied commanders convened to assess the campaign and its broader implications. Admiral Chester Nimitz, reflecting on the resilience and courage displayed by his forces, famously remarked, "Among the men who fought on Iwo Jima, uncommon valor was a common virtue." These words encapsulated the spirit of the battle, a testament to the courage, determination, and sacrifice of all who had taken part. The Battle of Iwo Jima and the kamikaze threat left a profound legacy, not only in the annals of military history, but also in the moral and philosophical reflections that arose in its aftermath. This pivotal moment in World War II provided both strategic lessons and deeper insights into the human cost of warfare, shaping the course of modern military strategy and the world's collective memory of the conflict. The kamikaze attacks represented a shift in military tactics that profoundly influenced post-war defense planning. These suicide missions forced military strategists to rethink the vulnerabilities of fleets and to develop technologies that would mitigate such existential threats in the future. Anti-aircraft defenses, which had been crucial during the Pacific War, were reimagined for greater efficiency. The introduction of automated systems like the Ehrlichon and Bofors guns laid the groundwork for future innovations in automated weapons technology, including missile defense systems and electronic warfare measures. Equally important were the advancements in radar technology, which played a crucial role in detecting incoming kamikaze planes during the later stages of the war. These developments emphasized the importance of early warning systems, inspiring the creation of integrated air defense networks that would prove essential in the Cold War era. By confronting the challenge of kamikaze tactics, Allied forces not only adapted to the immediate threat, but also set a precedent for addressing asymmetrical warfare in the decades to come. On a broader scale, the kamikaze phenomenon highlighted the intersection of military strategy and ideological fervor. The willingness of Japanese pilots to sacrifice their lives underscored the power of indoctrination and the profound influence of cultural values on military decision-making. For Allied commanders, this raised questions about how to counter not just the physical threat, but also the psychological and ideological forces that drove such extreme tactics. This understanding became increasingly relevant in the post-war era, as conflicts involving guerrilla warfare and terrorism demanded new approaches to countering ideologically motivated adversaries. The moral and ethical dilemmas posed by the kamikaze attacks also sparked debates that continue to resonate. The deliberate sacrifice of human lives as a weapon of war challenged conventional notions of honor and valor, prompting introspection about the human cost of conflict. For many Allied servicemen, the kamikaze threat evoked a mix of admiration for the pilots' courage and horror at the ruthless exploitation of their devotion. This duality remains a central theme in the historical narrative of the Pacific War, serving as a reminder of the complexities of wartime ethics. The Battle of Iwo Jima, meanwhile, became a symbol of resilience and sacrifice, immortalized in the iconic image of the flag raising on Mount Suribachi. For the United States, the battle represented the culmination of years of struggle and a turning point in the Pacific Campaign. It was a testament to the determination of the men who fought there and to the broader unity of the Allied forces. At the same time, it served as a stark reminder of the cost of victory, a cost measured not only in lives lost, but also in the enduring scars carried by those who survived. The lessons of Iwo Jima extended beyond the battlefield. The coordination required to overcome the island's formidable defenses demonstrated the value of joint operations and international cooperation. American forces were supported by intelligence, logistical aid, and material contributions from allied nations, highlighting the importance of unity in the face of global challenges. This spirit of collaboration laid the foundation for post-war alliances like NATO, which sought to prevent future conflicts through collective security and shared responsibility. The legacy of Iwo Jima and the kamikaze threat also found expression in efforts to honor the memory of those who had fought and died. Memorials and museums dedicated to the Pacific War sought to preserve the stories of individual bravery and sacrifice, ensuring that future generations would understand the human cost of the conflict. In Japan, the kamikaze pilots were both mourned as national heroes and remembered as victims of a militaristic regime that had pushed its people to the brink. These commemorations reflected a shared desire to learn from the past and to prevent the recurrence of such tragedies. The lessons of history, however, extended beyond the immediate context of World War II. The ideological fervor that fueled the kamikaze attacks found parallels in later conflicts, where suicide missions and asymmetrical tactics became defining features of modern warfare. The strategies developed during the Pacific War, from air defense systems to psychological operations, informed responses to these new threats, demonstrating the enduring relevance of the experiences at Iwo Jima and beyond. At the same time, the moral and ethical questions raised by the kamikaze phenomenon continued to shape debates about the conduct of war. The tension between the necessity of military action and the desire to preserve human life remained a central concern for policymakers, military leaders, and scholars. The experiences of the Pacific War served as a cautionary tale, reminding the world of the need for restraint and the importance of seeking peaceful solutions to conflicts whenever possible. In the years following the war, the relationship between the United States and Japan underwent a remarkable transformation. From bitter enemies, the two nations became close allies, united by shared interests and a commitment to peace. This reconciliation was a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the possibility of healing even in the aftermath of profound devastation. The lessons of Iwo Jima and the Kamikaze threat played a role in shaping this new partnership, serving as reminders of the cost of division and the value of cooperation. The story of Iwo Jima and the Kamikaze threat ultimately stands as a call to remember the past and to strive for a better future. It is a story of courage and sacrifice, of innovation and adaptation, and of the enduring quest for peace in a world often torn by conflict. As the world continues to grapple with new challenges, the lessons of this pivotal moment in history remain as relevant as ever, offering guidance and inspiration for generations to come. The men who fought and died on Iwo Jima left behind a legacy that transcends the boundaries of nations and eras. Their sacrifices remind us of the cost of freedom and the importance of cherishing the values for which they fought. As we honor their memory, we are called to reflect on the lessons of their struggle and to work toward a world where such sacrifices are no longer necessary.